Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session on inter and intra-faith solidarity. It's my pleasure to introduce our distinguished speakers and discussants who bring rich academic, religious, and practical experience in dialogue and cooperation across faith tradition. We're not going to take much time, so we're going to start with our first speaker, Professor Roula Talhouk from St. Joseph University of Beirut. She specialized in theology, religious anthropology, and Muslim-Christian relation, with particular interest in Lebanese Shia and Iranian Shiism. Please welcome Professor Roula. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for the presentation. I'm happy and honored to be among you today, especially since this is the first time I'm meeting the researcher affiliated with NCCMR network. Thank you for all the team and for Dr. Waji. And you will excuse me for advance for my English. I'm fully French educated. So if there is any word that I cannot spell, you will excuse me for this. I was asked to speak about intra and or inter solidarity, a theme that I find crucial in the times we are living through today. Solidarity is foundational for building a society. It is both a fraternal bond and a social value that unite the destiny of all human beings. The notion first described the objective fact of interdependence. This fact is also attested by the natural sciences, which highlight the law governing the functioning of organism, the law of association. The idea is to independently to understand society as an organized body, a body none of those organs can live independently of the other. The same metaphor appears in St. Paul's epistle to the Romans, and so on in Corinthian. We are all members of one and the same body. Solidarity refers both to an objective fact and to a moral ideal. It's a strength in its foundation, yet it's ambiguous in its scope: social, economic, political, human, and so on. As it has been rightly observed, solidarity is not always good. It has two sides. There is solidarity in evil, as in criminal associations, or the kind of solidarity that allows injustice and diseases to spread. The solidarity that must be developed is a voluntary solidarity aimed at justice and intended to correct the unjust effect of the de facto solidarity. The concept of solidarity evokes images of fervor, courage, and challenge, but also a sense of shared commitment, whatever its multiple names and manifestation may be, both historically and in contemporary life. It involves people who mobilize ties of mutual understanding and communal obligation in order to confront and transform what is unacceptable. Solidarity can be experienced as standing with others across lines of difference that would normally divide us. In this perspective, we may ask whether we can teach others, and indeed teach ourselves, to stand in solidarity with others, without dismissing people who feel differently, even diametrically opposed to us, as automatically or categorically wrong. What matters for us is, in the presentation, is to develop the concept more specifically within the field of intra or interreligious dialogue. Solidarity, steadfast and rooted in relationship. Etymologically, solidarity relates to the term solid, meaning what is stable first, for oneself and then for the other, in a movement that works in both directions, personal solidity in the sense of being sensible, that inspire confidence, and relational in the sense of being reliable for someone on whom one may depend. Within our theme, being a solid person does not imply rigidity of character. On the contrary, it's used to imply that we feel that the person is genuine and confident, inspiring, that he or she inspires trust, and that he can be rooted both in their faith and in their humanity. The two senses of someone being a solid person do not exclude one another. Thus, a person who is in solidarity with another or in solidarity with a human cause is a trustworthy person, committed to the cause and to the relationship proposed by the other. In our case, when speaking of intra or interreligious dialogue, the relationship of dialogue cannot be real without the human and spiritual solidarity that sustains it. What dialogue may require, among other things, is on the one hand, being rooted in one's faith and firm in knowledge of its dogmas, knowing oneself as a community, its history, its human and religious culture, its fears and anxieties. And on the other hand, knowing oneself as a person by discovering one's limit, one's dark and troubled eras, one's defense mechanism, and so on. Dialogue may give rise to fears, opposition, reservation, but may also lead on to reflect on the tension between dialogue and mission. Indeed, how can genuine concern for dialogue be reconciled with the desire to proclaim one's faith? How can one enter into a real encounter with the other without renouncing the urge to explicitly present one's own convictions? This relationship of dialogue is considered an anthropological space of mutual presence, of a real face-to-face encounter. In all that the face can hear in a human significance among equals in humanity and human dignity, for the sake of a better world, a world in which we build together, deliberately, a lasting peace where conflicts leads us to more discussion and more encounters rather than more wars. Pope Leo XIV, in a message to participants in an interreligious gathering in Bangladesh on September 9, 2025, revealed that his deepest dream is peace, not conflict. Against stereotypes, prejudices, and extremism, the Pope advocates choosing trust among believers of different religions. The key phrase remains, move away from suspicion towards trust. My second point, the image of the bridge. Similarly, in a speech by Pope Leo XIV, a call to unity and peace in fragmented world, the Pope declares that God loves us. God loves all of you, and evil will not prevail. At first glance, this statement could be interpreted as a simple declaration of faith. However, it should be analyzed within a broader context. At the heart of the speech lies the idea of building bridges through dialogue and encounter. The metaphor of bridges is especially powerful in our contemporary societies. It evokes the idea of overcoming obstacles of all sorts, cultural, religious, or political. In a world marked by rising tensions and increased conflicts, this call to solidarity may be seen as an invitation to a collective reflection on our common values. The traverse toward the other, a movement from both sides, must begin with the one who is ready to move across real space, to step forward in the metaphorical space, to expose oneself to difference, and to leave one's comfort zone and the convenience of certainty. It's a necessary passage for anyone who presents oneself as being committed to the cause of the human person with a capital P. And I do not divide the goals of the human being into separate human causes. Every human cause is a common cause. Every form of transgression against any community, group, or gender is an offense against humanity, against every person and the whole person. One must be ready for an inner conversation or conversion toward the other, to discover the human and spiritual dimension and the inner spaces of the other. This is done without converting the other, or changing the other, or dominating the other. Such an inner conversion can be lived only to the extent that the person engaged in the dynamic of dialogue is truly listening. It is an empathetic and authentic listening, not in order to respond to questions and differences, but in order to understand what is being said. The way it is said, the emotion behind it, and the reason for expressing it. Such listening places us at the disposal of the person before us, available, well-disposed, receptive, and mature. In reality, this is a whole program that I am offering you in just a few minutes. For our world is deeply lacking on several levels, humanly, certainly, as machine and technology are gaining the upper hand, our world's lack for emotional and spiritual intelligence increases, and the artificial intelligence does not make this task any easier. We also lack mature and willing leaders. I'm talking about Lebanon. Almost everywhere, we experience defense mechanism, identity-based reactions, and fears of interiority that do not lead us forward toward dialogue. On the contrary, these refusals only divide persons and communities and place them in confrontation rather than in a situation of encounter. Finally, we cannot be in solidarity with people who do not know, or with a cause that does not touch us. That is why encounters are fundamental and necessary. First, to know one another, then to become trusting and truthful. Otherwise, solidarity can become a pseudo-solidarity, belonging more to the order of diplomacy, performed with a view toward some expected gains. We must also beware of misunderstandings surrounding the term. Solidarity is not always good when it necessarily rests on a community of belongings. For in that way, it can result in exclusion. When speaking of solidarity, it's important to reconcile the freedom of each person with the cohesion of the whole, so that solidarity as a value may become a social force for development and peace. And thank you for your listening.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for finishing in time. We might have a few minutes for question time. Thank you very much. So we're going to have a second speaker, the great Dr. Jose Abraham. He's a professor of Islamic studies at Fuller Theological Seminary in the US. He specialized in Islam, Christian-Muslim relation, and intercultural engagement. Please welcome the podium.
Good morning, everyone. So grateful for to share the space with this esteemed panel members. My presentation is actually based on my book, which is just published last week, Beyond Orientalism. I had a PowerPoint, but I think the person is not here. Can you give me that? So the title of the book is Beyond Orientalism, Decolonizing Christian Approaches to Islam and Engagement with Muslims. This is a very brief summary, or maybe actually a kind of a reflection based actually on the book. So, in an age marked by increased polarization, Islamophobia, religious nationalism, and civilizational anxieties, the quality of Christian-Muslim relations has become an urgent concern. Although Christians and Muslims share long histories of coexistence, intellectual exchange, and a mutual influence, their encounter has also been shaped by inherited narratives of suspicion and otherness. Contemporary efforts towards interfaith solidarity therefore require more than dialogue and cooperation. They require critical reflection on the historical and intellectual frameworks that continue to shape how religious communities understand one another. Many Muslim understandings of Islam continue to operate within the conceptual frameworks inherited from European modernity, Orientalism, colonialism, and liberal Protestant constructions of Islam. So these frameworks not only shaped a representation of Muslims, but also introduced a particular understanding of human person, religion, society, and progress that were gradually universalized through colonial expansion. As a result, Islam has frequently been approached as a problem to be solved, a doctrine to be refuted, or a religious system standing in opposition to modernity. Such assumptions have profoundly influenced Christian scholarship, theological education, and popular perceptions of Muslim. So this paper argues that interfaith solidarity requires more than goodwill and peaceful coexistence. It requires Christians to critically examine the historical and epistemological assumptions that have shaped their understanding of Islam, and more broadly, the categories through which religion itself has been understood. Decolonizing Christian understanding of Islam does not entail abandoning theological convictions or erasing religious difference. Rather, it calls for shared response, calls for forms of engagement characterized by epistemic humility, deep listening, cultural sensitivity, and a shared responsibility. Such an approach invites Christians to encounter Islam not as a static or monolithic system, but as a historically embedded, internally diverse, and ethically rich tradition. So modern Christian understanding of Islam have been profoundly shaped by intellectual frameworks that emerged within the context of European modernity and colonial expansion. These frameworks involved more than negative representation of Muslims. They reflected a broader transformation in European understanding of the human person, society, and religion. As Charles Taylor has argued, modernity gave rise to a new conception of the self as autonomous, rational, and sovereign. Human beings increasingly came to be understood as free individuals whose dignity rested upon self-determination rather than inherited traditions or communal forms of life. Religion and traditions were often viewed as constraints upon human freedom rather than as sources of moral formation. The world itself became increasingly disenchanted, while nature appears as an object to be mastered and controlled through reason, science, and technological progress. Although these developments emerged from particular European historical experiences, they gradually came to be presented as a universal expressions of what it means to be human. The history of Europe was transformed into a universal norm. In this rendering, the ideal human increasingly appeared as a rational, civilized, progressive, and implicitly European. Such universal claims frequently marginalized alternative ways of being human and contributed to racial hierarchies and colonial ideologies that distinguished between the civilized and the uncivilized, the modern and the traditional. These representations did not emerge suddenly in the modern period. Medieval Christian polemics had already portrayed Islam as heretical, politically threatening, and religiously deviant. With the Renaissance, the Protestant Reformation, and the Enlightenment, these theological disputes were increasingly reformulated through the language of reason, civilization, science, and political progress. Islam was no longer viewed simply as a false religion, but came to be symbolized despotism, fanaticism, legal rigidity, and cultural stagnation. Europe increasingly understood itself as a liberal, rational, and enlightened, in contrast to imagined Islamic other. So, in this sense, Islam became what while Talhouk described as the illiberal other, necessary for the self-understanding of liberal modernity. The construction of Muslim otherness discussed above was accompanied by the spread of colonial institutions and categories that transformed societies across the Muslim world. European colonial expansion did not merely establish political and economic dominance, it also introduced new forms of education, law, economics, bureaucracy, and political organization modeled on a modern nation state. Colonialism was therefore not simply a political or economic project, it was also an epistemological project that reordered moral imagination and reshaped the categories through which religion, society, and human flourishing were understood. Colonial modernity also transformed the understanding of religion itself. Modern conceptions of religion within Europe were deeply shaped by Protestant assumptions that emphasized belief, scripture, doctrine, and inward faith. The Reformation privileged textual authority and doctrinal purity while often approaching ritual, saints, mysticism, and embodied forms of devotion with suspicion. Over time, these assumptions became embedded within the modern academic study of religion. As Brent Nongbury has argued, the category of religion itself reflects the historical specific assumptions about what authentic religion should look like. These assumptions profoundly influence how Christians and Orientalist scholars approach Islam. Quran was frequently treated as the Muslim Bible, abstracted from the interpretive, philosophical, the juridical, and mystical traditions that historically shaped Muslim engagement with it. Sharia was reduced to law rather than understood as a broader ethical tradition concerned with the cultivation of a virtuous life. Sufi traditions were marginalized because they did not conform to Protestant understanding of religion. Islam itself came to be understood primarily in terms of doctrine and legal prescriptions, detached from social, spiritual, aesthetic, and communal dimensions that shape Muslim life. Moreover, Orientalist scholarship privileged Arabic text and Middle Eastern context, while frequently neglecting the remarkable diversity of Muslim traditions across Asia, Africa, Southeast Asia, and other regions. So, if colonial modernity fragmented religious traditions by reducing religion to private belief, and then a decolonized Christian understanding of Islam must begin by asking how Islam is understood and lived within Muslim communities themselves. The question is not simply what do Christians think Islam is, but rather how Muslims historically understood, embodied, and transmitted and debated Islam as a way of life before God. This shift is essential for interfaith solidarity because genuine solidarity cannot be built upon abstract representation of the other. It must be grounded in attentive engagement with the lived realities, moral worlds, and a self-understanding of religious communities. Talal Asa's proposal to understand Islam as a discursive tradition offers a powerful way to move beyond such reductionist readings. By describing Islam as a discursive tradition, Asad does not mean that Islam is merely discourse, language, or abstract theory. Rather, he emphasizes that Islamic traditions are historically transmitted, interpreted, debated, embodied, and socially lived across generations. Muslims engage foundational sources such as Quran and Hadith, but do so through inherited practices of interpretation, legal reasoning, theological reflection, ethical formation, ritual discipline, and spiritual cultivation. Tradition in this sense is neither static repetition nor endless innovation. It's an ongoing process of continuity, argument, correction, and renewal. One of the clearest ways to understand this integrated vision of Islam is through the well-known hadith of Gabriel. In this narration, Angel Gabriel asked Prophet Muhammad about Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. Muslim scholars have often understood this hadith as offering the foundation grammar of Islamic tradition. So together, Islam, which is the practices, Iman, the faith, and Ihsan, the motivation, offers an integrated vision of a Muslim life. They hold together practice, belief, and spiritual formation. They shape not only theology, but also social relationship, ethics, aesthetics, memory, and a communal belonging. Islam is therefore lived and embodied in ordinary practices of daily life, in family obligations, hospitality, patterns of dress, food practices, ritual calendars, marriage ceremonies, funeral rites, Quranic recitation, architecture, calligraphy, and traditions of generosity towards guests and neighbors. In many Muslim societies, religion and culture cannot be easily separated because religious meanings are woven deeply into social existence. So, if inherited Christian understanding of Islam have been shaped by Orientalist assumptions, the fragmentation induced by colonial modernity, the question becomes what kind of relationship are possible in a post-colonial world? Decolonization is not merely an intellectual exercise concerned with correcting historical distortion, it is also an ethical and a relational task. Interfaith solidarity does not require the erasure of theological differences. Rather, it calls communities to cultivate forms of life that enable religious differences to be inhabited without hostility and to pursue the common good together. So this paper has argued that challenge of Christian understanding of Islam cannot be reduced simply to correcting negative stereotypes or overcoming a misunderstanding. Rather, many modern Christian approaches to Islam have been shaped by intellectual frameworks rooted in European modernity, Orientalism, and colonialism. These frameworks not only represented Muslims as the civilizational other of the modern West, but also introduced categories of religion, society, and human person that profoundly shaped how Christians and Muslims came to understand themselves and one another. Against these reductionist frameworks, the paper proposed a different way of approaching Islam. Drawing on Talal Asa's understanding of Islam as a discursive tradition and the Quranic concept of deen, it argues that Islam is not merely a system of doctrine or legal prescriptions, but a historically transmitted and socially embodied ways of life that integrates faith, ethics, spirituality, and communal belonging. Such an understanding invites Christians to move beyond abstract representations and to attend to the ways Muslims themselves have inhabited and interpreted their tradition across diverse historical and cultural contexts. At the same time, Christians and Muslims alike inhabit a shared post-colonial condition. Both communities continue to wrestle with the inherited categories that privilege private belief while fragmenting traditions that historically integrated morality, community, and spiritual formation. Yet the growing vitality of Christianity in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, together with the lived realities of religious plurality in many societies of the global south, demonstrate that communities have long learned to inhabit difference through the practice of hospitality, mutual care, and everyday coexistence. Such experiences remind us that religious life is not sustained by doctrine alone, but also by orthopraxy and orthopathy, by shared practices, rightly ordered affections, and habits of compassion. Decolonizing Christian understanding of Islam, therefore, is not simply an inherited intellectual exercise, it is also an ethical and relational task. Interfaith solidarity does not demand theological agreement or abandonment of religious convictions. Rather, it calls communities to cultivate deep listening, epistemic humility, hospitality, and shared responsibility for the common good. In a world increasingly marked by Islamophobia, religious nationalism, and fundamentalism, forced migration, ecological crisis, and deep social polarization, Christians and Muslims face many common vulnerabilities and shared responsibilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have next on discussion section, Reverend Dr. James Wuye is a peace builder from Nigeria. He's a co-founder of the Interfaith Mediation Center, internationally recognized for his work in interfaith reconciliation and mediation. Please welcome.
Peace be with you. I am highly delighted that today I have the opportunity of sharing the podium with such eloquent, erudite, very important, experienced speakers. It will be difficult for me to go into all that they have shared, but I will restrict myself to discussing the paper by Professor Roula on what she has presented. Really want to appreciate you for a thoughtful, spiritual, and rich paper. The paper successfully moved solidarity beyond theological concept to a pragmatic, practical framework of peace building. I particularly appreciate the emphasis that, that genuine solidarity is rooted in relationship rather than merely institutional or declaration. And this is why my colleague and I exemplify for the past 3 decades in terms of boots on the ground relating to solidarity. 3 major contributions of the paper. One is positive solidarity, which begins with trust. The paper reminds us that trust precedes dialogue. Without trust, there can be no dialogue. In many contexts, we rush to organize dialogue before rebuilding trust. Looking at the cost of conflict. Trust is not just created or at conference. It is a deliberate, empathic actions. Trust is built through shared experience, suffering like we have suffered, I have suffered, I lost a hand due to activities aimed at protecting my constituency then. It's about looking at our likes and dislikes and honestly discussing them. That leads to what we call trust. This one of the strongest insight of this paper. Dialogue requires rooted identities. The author rightly argues that genuine dialogue requires people to be secured in their faith while remaining open to others. There are quite a lot of layers of identity which time will not permit us to talk about. But from the African perspective, this is a particularly important. Weak identities often produce fear and complexes. Loose identity is based on value. Healthy identity produces confidence. Institutional Ubuntuism. I exist, you exist because I exist because you exist. Without you, I am not. That is Ubuntu. Confident and well-exposed believers in their faith traditions are usually better dialogue partners. I recall when we had a dialogue with the initiator of the Boko Haram, Muhammad Yusuf, in one of the state Bauchi. My colleagues, Imam Ashafa and Imam Sani Isa, dialogue with him from the 8 o'clock prayer till the early morning prayer on why dialogue. And he said, dialogue is only done by people who are deeply rooted in their identity and value. But then he couldn't participate in the dialogue and he went his way. Listening with resilience is more transformative than speaking. The Holy Bible says, be quick to listen, but slow to talk. The paper also emphasized an empathic listening observes special commendation. In many conflicts around the world, communities rarely listen to understand. They listen only to respond. That distinction is profound. Nigeria and African reflection. Allow me to contribute from my African experience. First, Africa has demonstrated both dangers of religious division and the possibility of religious solidarity. The Alexandrian Declaration, which was graciously brought to us by the visitors of Archbishop Ido Josiah Ferron with the Coventry Cathedral, done in Alexandria, did not work in Alexandria, but it worked in Kaduna. For 9 years, we experienced peace because we were able to import a system and has contextualized it in our context in Nigeria and in Kaduna in particular, and we experienced 9 years of peace before it was broken. Nigerian teaches an important lesson. Our greatest challenge is often not theological disagreement. It is the manipulation of religion by political, ethnic, and poverty and injustice superimposed on corruption and some government negative patronage. Suddenly, instead of having positive solidarity, the solidarity between some religious leaders and the government have produced rather deepened the divide in our communities. Third, Africa offers something unique to the global conversation. Unlike many Western societies where religion is becoming increasingly private, religion remains a living public force in Africa. We are very religious, but not entirely sometimes very godly. Churches and mosques remain among the most trusted institutions. Therefore, religious leaders carry enormous responsibility. If they preach peace, communities move towards peace. If they preach fear, communities become polarized. Using what I tag divine intimidation strategy, invoking divinity to get compliance. Africans and Nigerians, and particularly in the global south, people are intimidated, and you can market anything virtually using religion. And that's why religion is key in the world dialogue. Building bridges must include healing the memories. The paper beautifully uses the metaphor of bridge. I will add another metaphor. Before building the bridge, we should often need to heal the river beneath them before you heal the bridge. Otherwise, the wave will pull down the pillars. Communities carry trauma. Carrying trauma cannot simply be invited into dialogue. Victims need acknowledgement. Perpetrators need accountability. Communities need healing. In Nigeria, decades of violence have left deep wounds. Peace building, therefore, requires trauma healing alongside dialogue. This will eventually break the cycle of violence. Intrafaith solidarity deserves more attention. One important contribution I will encourage for the future work in greater attention is interfaith dialogue. Sometimes Christians struggle to unite with Christians. Sometimes Muslims struggle to unite with Muslims. Internal division weakens external dialogue. Strong Christian-Muslim relationship requires healthy relationship with each faith, communities as well. From dialogue to collaboration, collaborative action. Perhaps the next frontier is moving beyond dialogue into shared actions. Communities build trust faster when they solve problems together. For example, we have issues of climate, we have youth unemployment, we have violent extremism, education, and a host of others. We have simple acts of clearing grave sites of Christian and Muslim youth going to clear the Muslim grave site, or vice versa, will build the dialogue. As they cut the grass, they talk. Working together often builds, blessed are the time, but for time is not my French friend here. Practitioners observation. After more than 3 decades of this, people rarely become enemies because they know too much about one another, and become enemies because they know too little. Relationship remains the most effective antidote to prejudices and proxy judgment. You see somebody from afar, you have judged him by his dress, and we have killed in Nigeria based on a dress. The first victim of the Muslim-Christian killing was a Muslim dressed with a shirt. In one of the communities, he was killed before asking him whether religion he belongs. And the treasurer of a Christian Association of Nigeria was killed because he dressed like a Hausa man as a Muslim. And so, proxy judgment is this. So let me conclude by saying, the question for Professor Roula is, I will respectfully ask the author 3 or 4 rhetorical questions. 1, how can solidarity survive when communities continue to experience recurring violence and repeated betrayal. 2, what practical indicators can we use to measure whether religious solidarity is actually growing rather than simply being discussed? And 3, how can young people become more, not merely participating, but leaders in the next generation of Christian-Muslim solidarity? The use of AI by Khalili Foundation under the Commonwealth in UK is something that I think worth exploring. Closing, I will conclude by suggesting that future Christian-Muslim relations should not ultimately be determined by our theological statement alone. It will be determined by whether Christians and Muslims choose to become trustworthy neighbors before they become persuasive debaters. As we often say in Africa, peace is not merely the absence of conflict, but is the presence of just relationship. If solidarity becomes a lived relationship rather than an occasional event, then the future envisioned an excellent paper that can become a reality for all of you. Blessed are those who keep to time, for they shall be invited again. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next we have Hujjatu Islam Mawlana Syed Aftab Haider. He's Islamic scholar and founder of the Ahlul Foundation of South Africa, with extensive experience in interfaith dialogue and community leadership. Thank you.
I greet all of you with the universal greeting of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, thank you for this opportunity, and thank you to the organizers of this really extremely enriching and inspiring symposium. Due to time constraints, of course, I will focus only on the paper of my dear brother, Jos Abrahams. First of all, I would like to say that it's a really well-researched, beautifully well-structured article, and addresses the topic of this particular session very directly and focuses on it. It appears to me that he wants to argue that one of the stumbling blocks in Muslim-Christian relationships is the way we understand each other. The article argues that the contemporary Christian understandings of Islam have often been shaped by intellectual frameworks of European modernity, Orientalism, colonialism, of course, and liberal Protestant conceptions of religion. According to author, these frameworks portrayed Islam as the civilizational other of the modern world, and frequently approached it primarily as a system of doctrines or legal rules rather than as Muslims themselves understand and live it. The paper, you have heard part of it, of course. The paper itself was very detailed. He summarized it very beautifully here. The paper contends that the colonial modernity transformed not only representations of Islam, but also the categories through which both Christian and Muslims come to understand religion. By privileging religion as private belief and doctrine, these categories obscured Islam's broader character as a lived tradition, encompassing, embracing ethics, spirituality, ritual laws, and so on. Of course, he has cited three very important scholars, seminal scholars, I will say, Edward Said, Talal Asad, and Wael Hallaq. Edward Said, of course, in a journal, decolonization, of course, aspect, and Talal Asad more on the history of Islamic law and Sharia, and Wael Hallaq again on another aspect. No doubt their contributions are great in understanding of the Western Christian understanding and discourse on Islam and Muslims. The article also further argues that Christians and Muslims share a post-colonial condition, since both continue to negotiate assumptions inherited from colonial modernity. Consequently, genuine interfaith engagement requires more than correcting stereotypes or engaging in theological debates. It calls for epistemological tawazu or humility, which was also somehow reflected in your presentation of solidarity. Deep listening, cultural sensitivity, and willingness to understand Islam as Muslims themselves have historically interpreted it across diverse cultural and historical context. Finally, the author argues that examples of religious coexistence in global South, particularly he refers in his own area, Kerala, demonstrate that interfaith solidarity is sustained through everyday relationships, hospitality, mutual care, and sheer commitment to justice and the common good. So this is really, I will say, very strong points of his article. Some places which I felt to be mentioned or noted is that he started this issue of misunderstanding of Islam and Muslims. He has taken from basically post-colonial period and so on. While I think it was good to take it a little bit further back, the role of Crusaders and fall of Al-Andalusia in the making of this European Christian understanding and discourse of Islam. This precedes the Protestant Reformation, religious reformation, which happened, of course, in the 16th century, or Enlightenment in the 17th century, or, for example, colonialism and conquer of European Muslim lands in the 18th and 19th centuries. So this is something I think was important to be mentioned, where role of church and directly religious leadership is very clear, and I don't want to go in detail, then I'm sure the audience are well aware of. Also, again, absence of reference to the writings of Christian and Muslims in West Asia and in the early period. For example, very interesting character, I think, in the opening, it was mentioned by Dr. Wagi, Ali ibn Sahl Rabban al-Tabari, apparently a Christian who converted to Islam and has, of course, written books, polemics, but anyway, interesting discussions are there. Or Abu Qurra, for example, from other side. Their works are very important for us to gauge dialogue or debates between Christians and Muslims on theological issues, on doctrinal issues, and its meaning for interfaith dialogue, which includes, I think, very uncomfortable difficult questions that will lead to learning about one another and respect. I don't have time also, but also on this issue of from Talal Asad, which he has highlighted and in his paper goes to quite a bit in detail, discursive religion, or that requires a bit of more of a debate where it's not only history, it's not only society, but it's of course divinity and message of God, and that aspect of course is also there to look at it. Also, very quickly, if time allows, I'd like to share my own experience in this regard, in this scenario in South Africa, from where I, as a religious leader, a Shia clergy, Muslim Shia clergy, came to South Africa from a background where we don't have a great deal of exposure to Christians in Pakistan or, for example, Middle East or Iran or wherever I was studying or lived, or my family's very limited exposure to Christians naturally there. And when I moved to South Africa and started to lead the community, my own community, I realized need of this dialogue and need of this channel of communication, and how this transformation took place from the point where I openly admit and acknowledge that 35 years, 36 years ago, for me, Christians were really other. To the point where I, without hesitation, can say that Christians are not other for me, but my own brother. This journey of transformation, this journey of evolution, you can say takamul, took place over years with interactions, with understandings, with again same issue of humility, which I realized over and over, again and again, before the other. While not doubting my own doctrine or faith, while not becoming shaky or doubtful about my own commitment to my principles. No. But it did not give me, with this new, exposure, that I have a license to absolutism and not to allow anybody else to think differently. I can believe that what I believe is the right and truth, but it does not give me permission and license to think nobody else has think differently and reach to a different conclusion. This journey, and especially with great interaction with the Catholic church leaders and discussions with them, dialogue with them, deep dialogues with them, hours and hours, realized the shared values, the depth of spirituality, especially in both traditions, and finding God. So for me, this Christian-Muslim relationship, from being just a strategy to live peaceful coexistence and so on, moved from that's a very basic point where we started, to the point where I think that this is a journey of finding God, a journey together, finding God and love of God, and we can travel together this journey. Thank you very much for this time.
Thank you very much. So I think we might have one, we're going to have a question for one person due to lack of time. Does anybody have any question?
Thank you very much for all of you. I just want to mention my dear sister and colleague, Tivoli. She's also an architect, and we are engaged in bridge building. And I would like to, I'm reminded with all what you said of our great Lebanese brother, Ramis Salama. I don't know if you know him or not, Mr. Ramis Salama, who is a lawyer. His vision, he's a Christian Lebanese. His vision was Nartaki, that there is a mountain, and if you are on this side and the other person is on the other side, but we need to climb to reach the summit so that we meet. Our sister, Tivoli, also said, Nartaki, that we meet so that we ascend together. And she described, because in moral rearmament or initiatives of change, we have the core values, absolute honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. In Arabic, she found it amana, mahabba, ithar, naqa, you know. And she put it that every first letter goes to aman, you know.
So,
security, security. And then she tied it with the beautiful poem, or إذا الإيمان ضاع فلا أمان. If faith is lost, there is no security. I'm just calling for human security. What you are? Thank you very much. Sorry.
Maybe let's have maybe a quick question, and then we'll be finishing. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Please.